Should we replace Columbus Day with another holiday? Here's your do now in class discussion. The first question I'd like you to ask and then pause the video is why do people often feel easy when they are judged? So pause the video and have a class discussion about that. And our second question is if judging people makes people feel uneasy, should we abstain from judging people at all? Why or why not? Pause the video and discuss that. So what I'd like you to know is that judgment is a tool. If we never judge people, we risk inadvertently condoning their bad behavior. For example, if we just avoid saying Hitler was evil, that's in a way saying that the Holocaust was okay. We need to judge to prevent evils from the past from reoccurring. Our mission as historians is to use the tool of judgment correctly and avoid mistakes, for example, like stereotyping, rushing to judgment, falling for illusions, etc. And remember that practice makes perfect. You're going to inevitably make mistakes judging people and historical figures. The goal is to get better and admit that you aren't perfect while doing so. Admit that you may make mistakes and be open to people criticizing your judgments. Ironically, they're going to be judging your judgments, and make sure that you're not just very stubborn and say, I'm always right. So one tool for judging is a continuum. A continuum is a tool for judging things. It's basically just a number line. And we use continuums to answer questions such as, on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is X, Y, or Z? How important is this thing? That's kind of what a continuum is for. And here's an inquiry in class discussion. In what ways is a continuum a better tool for judgment than a dichotomous T-chart? You can see here that this is a T-chart. We just put everything into good or bad categories. And on the bottom, we have, again, a continuum, which is like a number line. How is the continuum on the bottom better than the dichotomous T-chart on the top? So also important for this lesson is the term accountability. Accountability means how responsible someone is for something. So for example, let's do 3 quick examples and get some class participation. Number 1, Joe buys a gun and shoots someone. How accountable is Joe for his actions? Number 2, Joe drinks way too many sodas and is overly energetic from the caffeine. Skipping down the hallway, he accidentally bumps into a classmate, hurting her. How accountable is Joe for his actions? And lastly, number 3, walking down the street, Joe is pushed by Jim into Tina and Tina gets hurt. How accountable is Joe for Tina getting hurt? All right, I think it's pretty simple. Just go over the answers real quick. I'm sure you can get this, but it's important to get the basics. In number 1, Joe buys a gun and shoots someone. He's obviously completely accountable for his actions. Number 2, Joe drinks way too many sodas and then accidentally bumps into a classmate. I think he would be somewhat accountable. He's definitely accountable for becoming too energetic, but he did bump into a classmate by accident, so he's somewhat accountable, but definitely less accountable than just buying a gun and shooting someone. And lastly, walking down the street, Joe is pushed by Jim into Tina, and Tina gets hurt. How accountable is Joe? Well, not at all. It seems to be Jim that's accountable. Joe didn't do anything. He's not really responsible for what happened to Tina. Alright, so today we're going to use a double continuum, and it looks like a 2D graph, and you'll see that in a second. And we're going to judge Columbus simultaneously on, number 1, how good or bad his actions and the impact of his actions were, and number 2, how accountable Columbus was for those actions and impacts. And you're going to see that in a second. 1 is super easy. You're just simply saying, was this good or bad? And number 2 is, at the same time, you're not only going to say how good or bad it was, but separately, you're going to say, how accountable was Columbus for that good or bad? Was it his fault? Was it an accident? Did it have nothing to do with him? Or was he completely responsible? Make sure not to kind of confuse these two. These are 2 separate things that you're going to plot on a graph with a point, and we'll go over that in a second. You'll be able to see it on the next slide. So this is something that your teacher will give to you. It's going to be a graph. I apologize for the kind of poor quality of this. There should be little hash marks on the number line, but it's very difficult to do in Google Drive. But so you're going to draw 2 number lines. So on the x-axis, you're going to have accountability, and all the way on the left, you're going to have not accountable. And all the way on the right, very accountable. So, for example, Jim shoots Tina with a gun, he goes and buys it and he shoots her, he would be very, very accountable. Jim is pushed by his friend into Tina and hurts Tina. While that might be bad, that's not what we're judging on this line. On the x-axis, we are simply judging accountability, and it's not Jim's fault. All right, and then on the vertical axis, very simple, good or bad. All right, now I've labeled these four quadrants into lucky, hero, klutz, or villain. So, for example, let's take in the top right. Let's start up in the top right quadrant. If somebody is very accountable for their actions and everything they do is good, they would probably be a hero. So, if you're judging Columbus mostly in the top right quadrant, you're going to think he's a hero, and definitely think we should continue having a Columbus Day, or probably continue that. Let's go to the bottom right quadrant. We'll just go clockwise around. If everything you do is bad and you're accountable for all of it, you're responsible for everything you do and everything you do is terrible, that would make you a villain. All right, let's go to the bottom left quadrant. If everything you do is bad, but you're not really accountable for it, we could call you a klutz. I don't know if you're necessarily a bad person, but lots of bad things seem to follow you around. You seem to be a klutz. And lastly, if everything you do is good in the top left quadrant, if everything you do is good, but you're not accountable for it, we could call you lucky. All right, so that's going to inform whether or not you think we should continue to have a Columbus Day. And for each note, as you're going to see on the next slide, you're simply going to plot an A or a B or a C, depending on what note it is, on this double continuum. It's basically just a graph. All right, so here are the directions again. For each item, judge Columbus by putting the corresponding letter on the double continuum. So for example, I have A in the bottom left quadrant and B in the top right quadrant, and these are going to correspond to nodes. Obviously, you don't know what A and B are yet. You'll see that in the future. But let's say Columbus discovered the New World entirely by accident. Well, that's actually, let's not do that. Let's say for A, we had to say that something he did was very bad, but it was by accident. So Columbus discovers the New World by accident, and then upon arriving, he trips over his gun and accidentally shoots a bunch of natives. Well, that's obviously very, very bad. But on the other hand, it really wasn't his fault. It was a complete accident, so we'd put it down here. And then let's say a hero. I don't know, theoretically speaking, if Columbus intended to go to the New World, he knew where it was, he braved the great waves, and when he was there, he discovered new medicines that he brought back to Europe and saved lots of people's lives. Well, in the top right quadrant B, he'd be very accountable. I just made all that up. Obviously, you're going to base this on real the things that actually happen that we're going to get to in a second. And of course, as always, very, very important that you can have it anywhere in here. You should have a number line, and things don't have to be on the extremes. They don't have to be all the way in the bottom left corner or all the way in the top right corner. They can be shades of good. So if something's good or bad, so for something really good, you want to be saving thousands of lives. If it's all the way at the top of the graph, it's got to be really, really good. If it's only partially good, put it somewhere in the middle. That's the importance of a continuum. It's not just all good or all bad. You should be engaging gradients of judgment. All right, so those are your directions. You're going to get about 10 notes. I'm going to go through them very quickly, and then I'll give you your assignment. Obviously, you can rewind, but for each of the following notes, you're going to be labeling it on this graph. All right, so here are our notes. A, while likely looking for a path to Asia, Columbus was the first non-native to reach Hispaniola, it's an island, in 1492. While other non-natives had almost certainly reached the New World before Columbus, for example, there's substantial evidence that other Europeans had reached the New World. There's significant or some evidence that Africans had reached the New World before 1492. It is important to know that those cultures had basically forgotten about the New World, and Columbus rediscovered it for Europe. Yes, there were people already there, but Europe had forgotten, and Columbus essentially rediscovered the New World. So again, let's go back to the graph. How good or bad is that? And then how accountable was Columbus for that? So you're going to place 1 point, the A note, somewhere on this graph. Remember, it doesn't have to be in the extremes unless you think it's really great or really terrible. or he was really accountable or really not. That's up to you. But you're just going to put an A somewhere on this graph, and you're going to do that for each of these notes. All right, so that's A. He's like the last. They often say Columbus is the last person to discover the New World. All right, B. On his second trip, Columbus read a letter he was ordered to read from the King of Spain to the Taino Native Americans. The letter implored the Native Americans to convert to Spain's religion of Catholicism and threatened the Native Americans with enslavement, torture, or death if they did not comply. And remember that Columbus was a Catholic. All right, place B on the graph. How accountable was Columbus for this, and how good or bad was the reading of this letter? All right, C. Columbus claimed all lands he sailed by in the name of Spain, and this was customary for all Spanish explorers at the time, common practice. All right, how accountable was Columbus for that, and how good or bad was Columbus doing that? D. To prove his story is truthful, Columbus kidnapped a small group of Native Americans and brought them back to Spain. Some of the Native Americans died on the way. Place that on the graph. How good or bad was Columbus doing this, and how accountable was he for what happened? E. Columbus enslaved Native Americans and demanded they provide food, gold, and sex. To ensure cooperation, Columbus used punishment by example. For even minor infractions, he cut off noses or ears to scare everyone else into complying with his authority. All right, place that on the graph. F. Eventually, Native Americans rebelled against the Spanish. Unfortunately, the Native Americans' weapons were almost completely ineffective against armor and guns, and many of them died in the conflicts. All right, place that on the graph. G. Columbus's discoveries led to a new age of scientific and rational questioning in Europe, especially among the religious. Biblical historians could not easily explain the rules of the afterlife for Native Americans because they never had the chance to convert to Christianity in the first place. Were they bound to go to hell for not worshiping Jesus? How could they be if they've never heard of Christianity before? All right, so a new age of scientific and rational questioning in Europe. Place that on the graph. H. National rivalries and war began or greatly increased among European countries as they competed to try to get a foothold in the New World. All right, how great or bad was that, and how accountable was Columbus for that? Place that on your graph. I. Spanish contact decimated the Native American population. Some Native Americans died due to armed conflict, but many more died when the Spanish disturbed the local ecosystem by forcing Native Americans to work as slaves for profit rather than on sustainable agriculture. However, by far, the most Native Americans died from simple contact with European diseases and microbes that they had no immunity to. All right, so how good or bad was that, and how accountable was Columbus for these deaths? And lastly, J, a new multicultural society was born. The United States as a melting pot begins with Columbus. Actually, there's one more. So do J, a new multicultural society was born. And lastly, one more is K. As Native American, oh no, sorry, there's two more. My apologies. As Native Americans died, the Spanish looked for an alternate source of labor. The Spanish began enslaving Africans to work in the New World because they were immune to European diseases and were used to working in hot climates. How accountable is Columbus for African slavery, and how good or bad was that? And lastly, I apologize, this is the real last one. The Columbian Exchange. Africa, Europe, and the New World experienced a revolution of diet and lifestyle that continues to this day. New plants and animals and cultures were introduced to both sides of the world that greatly helped each side. Unfortunately, disease was also part of this equation, and many people got sick or died from the trading of microbes across the continents. All right, so here's your assignment. You're going to use your graphs for this assignment. The graphs will really help you answer this question. All right, in recent years, many people have argued that Christopher Columbus is not a hero and should no longer be celebrated with a holiday. Others disagree and think Columbus is essential to the history of the United States. Should our society continue to celebrate Columbus Day, or should his day be replaced with a holiday celebrating someone else, and why? Write a 5-paragraph essay to prove your view.